Good evening and welcome to today's Tropics for August 18th, 2020. Please note, I'm not a meteorologist, and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storms I'm talking about. And for any decision making, please consult National Hurricane Center or your local officials. So today I'm looking at Invest 97L currently in the Eastern Caribbean and Invest 98L in the Central Atlantic. So first off, let's take a look at Invest 97L. Got a couple of outflow boundaries here, and these are a sign of the dry air around the storm, which is currently one thing impeding organization. Another thing is its fast forward speed, which is keeping it from closing off and having a lot of low levels of convergence. And as a result, there isn't much thunderstorm activity. There's a little bit trying to get going around here, but it isn't too impressive. And in fact, if you go look further south over land in Venezuela, there is heavier convection, and that is winning out over the oceanic convection. That's also probably hurting Invest 97L. So while it has to interact with land, it's probably not going to have an easy time developing. And this dry air definitely won't help. But as we get into the later week, it looks like conditions might become more favorable, and that's probably when the window for more significant development will arrive. So valid about 15 minutes before I'm recording, here is 97L, and it's a decently noticeable wave in the region. It's still broad, and it's suffering from a lot of dry air in the vicinity of it, especially to the west. There's a bubble of higher humidity, but it's behind the storm. And as a result, it doesn't really have that moist air you would want to see with a stronger, or at least even organizing system. And that is the reason why you're seeing these outflow boundaries, just because it is quite dry in the region. However, that might change because going into the later week, so this is Thursday morning, you see Invest 97L with this pressure minima right here, and it's not great, but it's not as bad with relative humidity as it's starting to rise over the system. But probably it's one of the most favorable times for it is early Saturday morning, so this is early weekend time frame, when it's moving into the Western Caribbean, and it's got a confluence of factors which are going to help it. First of all, there's a trough that's coming down into the Gulf of Mexico and eroding this ridge away. So that means there are some competing factors that are steering the storm, and that means one, it's going to turn a bit more north, and two, the competing factors mean that it's also going to not go as fast under the ridge. Instead, it's going to slow down. That might allow some more surface convergence and for it to close off. So that is definitely more favorable. Circling the wave again, here you can see that the conditions around it are also more favorable. There's higher relative humidity. There are a couple drier spots here, but it's definitely a lot better than we are seeing right now. And at the same time, there is that trough coming down into the Gulf of Mexico, and that is bringing along with it a jet. And we could see some jet interaction and upper level divergence near Invest 97L. That could act to strengthen it too, with convection firing over this more favorable area. We'll definitely have to see. The models don't do too much of it, even though conditions around it look pretty favorable at this point. We'll have to see if the models are right, or if they're just not handling this situation well. We'll have to see. As for track and intensity, there is consensus actually among the GFS and Euro ensembles. These are Euro ensembles, that it's going to track mostly westward and then start curving a bit more north as the trough digs down into the Gulf, and Invest 97L starts feeling that. But the ensembles do generally keep it pretty weak. We'll have to see if there's another factor, if it's just the broadness of the storm or maybe land interaction that keeps it weak. but they do keep it weaker, and so this is the consensus for it to track probably over the Yucatan Peninsula before eventually it emerges in some part of the Gulf. Beyond that, it's harder to tell, and we'll definitely need some more data as it gets closer into that region. Looking at the GFS ensembles, there's even fewer of those because some of these, the vortex just can't be tracked because it's so weak. But there's that sort of curve that is a lot there with Euro ensembles as well. Now we could see it go a bit more north in this if it's stronger and feels the trough a bit more, or if it generates convection to its north in that upper divergence zone. So that could pull it a bit more north than the model consensus, but we'll have to see how it is doing as it enters the Western Caribbean to make any confident judgments in what is going to happen. I'm taking a look at Invest 98L. One thing that sticks out pretty easily or clearly is that mid-level center here, and see some nice rotation. And this is an area where if you see convection starting to fire over here, you might see this mid-level center start to work its way down to the surface, and that's where you probably see attempted formation of a tropical cyclone. Right now, there isn't evidence of a low-level center here, and there isn't really much convection over here, so right now it's not forming. And at the same time, there might be some interruptions, not even from unfavorable conditions in the short term, but because of some internal issues, which is this competing area just to the east. And you can see this other mid-level center with the other one, or the one I highlighted earlier right here. So it's a generally large, broad system, and unless we see one or the other of these become very dominant so that the other just basically gets absorbed into it or can't compete, or if they merge as they're expected to, because this one is moving faster to the west than this one. So unless they merge into one area of vorticity, or we see one vorticity maximum become very dominant, we're going to see the system struggle even with relatively favorable external conditions. The internal issues are probably going to slow intensification until it can get itself more sorted out. One thing of interest actually on the water vapor here is this southwesterly flow aloft, and that is that Tutlow that might interact with Invest 98L down the line. Now, a lot of the more reliable guidance isn't doing a whole lot with Invest 98L. Both the Euro models right now and the GFS models, at least in the actual deep tropics, don't do a whole lot with Invest 98L. That could be because, unless they're right, they could be having issues with actually like resolving the area of broad vorticity, and in the monsoon trough here, and as the GFS has actually been doing, or they could be right, but it definitely seems that in the favorable conditions, it doesn't do much. So it's definitely more uncertainty than usual, and we'll have to look at more short-term trends that might suggest development or not. Hopefully, though, the external conditions that will be affecting it are a bit better modeled on the guidance here. And while their conditions are relatively favorable at the moment for Invest 98L, it looks like it'll start struggling a little bit into the late week. And the first part of that is this flow to the north of it. This is the gradient between Invest 98L and the mid-level high to the north of it. And this is causing very strong wind aloft. And similar to ECIE as just a few weeks ago, actually, that would move it pretty quickly off to the west-northwest. And that would mean it would have a hard time closing off. And the usual trouble with a system moving that fast. This flow is also pretty quick here in relation to the other levels. So it looks like there might be some mid-level shear that also interrupts some of the vorticity, or not vorticity, some of the convection in the area. So it definitely looks like this might start interrupting the storm a little bit. Uh, the conditions aren't super unfavorable in the upper levels, though. It seems this Tutlow digging down here isn't really far enough south to affect Invest 98L, and it's a more transient feature rather than the same thing that was further southwest and ended up shearing Josephine earlier into remnant low. Now, in situations especially like these, it's definitely a bad idea to look directly at deterministic model guidance to see what a storm is going to do, because the enhanced uncertainty here means it's a pretty bad idea to look at one run of a storm of a model. But the GFS actually, after not really developing at all, makes it a stronger storm recurving near the east coast of the United States. Now, that may or may not happen, but it does show that in the Bahamas there might be a slightly more favorable environment for 98L. That's assuming it doesn't trend further south, because that would mean the Greater Antilles here, and which are mostly pretty mountainous, would shred up the system. And while it is a broad wave that might be able to counteract this with its sheer size, it would definitely not help the storm, and would probably keep development at bay until it gets over more open water further west. But if it goes more north, there's definitely a more favorable environment in the Bahamas here, and you can see with this upper level flow. So here's where the GFS has Invest 98L roughly. And while again there is a bit of that easterly wind aloft, that's roughly the same direction that Invest 98L is moving in. So as a result, the upper air conditions are actually pretty favorable, and that's why it's able to develop. So we'll definitely have to see what Invest 98L does in this region if it tries to develop it into a stronger storm under those more favorable conditions. But there is a lot of uncertainty between now and then. This isn't until Monday afternoon, so that's almost a week out. So it's definitely a little early to look at that. But if it does track north of the islands, definitely keep an eye on it. So again, here are the ensembles for or ensemble forecast for Invest 98L. Here are the Euro ensembles, and they basically take it on the track that's been expected right now, and that is west-northwest through the main development region, and then just north of the Greater Antilles, and then into the Bahamas around 5 days from now, give or take a day or so. And then we'll see how favorable the environment is. If 97L is stronger, it's probably going to shear 98L. So it's definitely a lot of moving parts here, but we'll have to see about that. One thing you might notice is that the Euro ensembles are much weaker than they were before, so they're definitely backing off, but we need more than a couple of runs for that. So in the next day or two, we'll definitely have a lot more data, and we'll see if it's trying to develop. And if not, it's probably going to start trending a bit more south, and that's when you're going to have the interaction with the Greater Antilles, and that might delay the formation further, but we don't really have that data at the moment. Looking at the GFS ensembles, they're considerably more bullish, and you can see kind of a bifurcation. So you have the weaker systems travel to the south, where they don't really have a favorable environment, and a lot of them actually go into the Greater Antilles, so that is not favorable either. Then there's a couple that go over the Gulf and seem to have a similar environment to the ones in the Bahamas and intensify. But you have a lot of those stronger members tracking a bit further north away from the islands and into the Bahamas, where they start to strengthen in this more favorable area. But again, this is 6 to 7 days out, and that's pretty far out, especially when you have a system that doesn't really have a lot of certainty to it. So it's a little early to see what it's doing in the Bahamas, but at the very least, especially with FS 98L tracking near the islands, stuff like squalls associated with whatever the storm is at that point seem likely in the Lesser Antilles, especially the Leeward Islands, and the Greater Antilles, and as well as the Bahamas and Florida. Just keep a wary eye on this. It may or may not be a threat. It's a little too early to tell, but it's definitely not a bad idea to keep an eye on the storm. And as always, be prepared for the hurricane season in general, even if this ends up not being much of a threat. Not too much else to talk about in the Atlantic right now at the moment. If you have any questions or comments about my video, please let me know, and thanks for watching.